One of the unfortunate things about a survey like this is that I'm trying in a few 15-minute lectures at most to sum up a thousands of years old tradition of philosophical reflection. And therefore, I must do it injustice in the way I describe it. I'm leaving a whole lot out. What I'm just trying to do here is give you enough of an understanding that you can grasp enough to go on and study more if you would like to. So, ignoring a lot of the permutations of how meditation or wisdom are practiced among the various sects and schools of Buddhism, I'm going to risk being overly simplistic by telling you that most Buddhists, including the Theravada or the ancient Buddhist versus Mahayana, the Chinese East Asian Buddhist and Tibetan Buddhist, all of them take for granted that the average person, even to get to the stage of wanting to get on the path to enlightenment, must be ethical, must have this right speech, this right action, and this right livelihood. And that's the average Buddhist layperson does that, and that's fine. But that will never get you to enlightenment. It's just the propedeutic to it. It's the foundation. Those who think that they can achieve enlightenment in this life concentrate on the other two aspects of mental discipline and intellectual reasoning. And there's a lot of debate on what should be emphasized and what will lead to enlightenment directly. So there are those schools that emphasize intellectual reasoning. And those schools do this, as we said, not because they believe logic is going to be able to take the perfect picture of reality. There is no perfect picture. The minute it's taken, it's inaccurate. But rather, because when I use reason, I can break the hold of reasoning over my mind and therefore tear through the conceptual veil that separates me from a direct experience of reality. So the idea is to use reason, destroy reason's hold over my mind, to show that it's like the Wizard of Oz. It's the man behind the curtain. It's not the magical wizard that we thought it was. And thus we can use it without being used by it. So now that way of doing things is emphasized especially by Zen Buddhism, certain form of Zen Buddhism, which emphasizes the quick way to enlightenment. Because the idea is on theirs that you're either enlightened or you're not, and that you cannot gradually achieve enlightenment, just like you cannot gradually be pregnant or halfway pregnant or halfway there. Either you see reality as it is or you don't. And even the slightest smudge on your mirror is a distortion and therefore still not enlightenment. So this school emphasizes immediate enlightenment. Whereas the other schools, which agree with this intellectual reasoning but emphasize meditation or dhyana, think that all of this can occur gradually, as the mind is gradually prepared, like soil, to have the seeds of enlightenment sprout up. And there are degrees of enlightenment depending on your degrees of mental discipline. So now, meditation in general for Buddhism comes in two styles. The Chan Buddhism, or the sitting, dhyana. And the idea here is you get away from the world of distraction, right? You go to a monastery, you go to a quiet place, a place where you're not in the hurly-burly of everyday life, which demands that you not focus or discipline, but you're constantly having your attention drawn in a zillion directions. So thus it tends to be in Southeast Asia that you have these sitting forms of meditation. And again, the idea is making the mental effort to be mindful and directly trying to, through the quieting of your thoughts, to calm the pond of your mind to become that mirror. What happens as Buddhism comes to northern China and Japan was this idea that actually this kind of meditation won't get you there, because this kind of meditation emphasizes a distinction between the ordinary life and the extraordinary life, the kind of life that is going to get you to nirvana and the kind of life that is keeping you within the cycle of samsara. But we saw that those kind of distinctions are all conditioned. They're all based on concepts that are limited. And so therefore, whenever I say nirvana is different than samsara, I separate the two by concepts. And by doing that, I'm stuck and attached to my ideas. When I understand that everything is empty of self-reality, because everything is mutually dependent, then I realize that even the idea of non-samsara is itself dependent on samsara. And thus the two, samsara and nirvana, are not different from each other. The ordinary realm of existence, of mountains and lakes, so to speak, is no different than the extraordinary realm of absolute detachment. They're the same because there are no distinctions. Every distinction is empty of ultimate reality. So once I understand emptiness, then I understand that there's no difference between meditating and sitting and meditating and raking the leaves, or meditating and writing a poem, or meditating and giving a speech. And all of these things, then the practice is to do things, but do it in a way that is mindful, that actually increases the mind's ability to see that what is going on can be going on in a way that reflects ultimate reality and doesn't obfuscate it. Thus, the ordinary and the extraordinary are the same. And you see this a lot when you look at, for example, Karate Kid. The old examples in Karate Kid, if you remember Mr. Miyagi, he had, I don't remember the kid's name, he had him paint the fence, right? He's going to teach him this extraordinary Buddhist art of karate, and he's going to teach him by not teaching him karate, but teaching him how to paint a fence, or to wax on, wax off. And what it turns out, and he doesn't see until Mr. Miyagi reveals it to him, is that painting the fence is karate, and waxing the car is karate. That ordinary doing and extraordinary doing are really the same thing. It's just a new view on the same reality. Thus the emphasis again that samsara is nirvana. So now how does this kind work? Because this is very famous. You might have heard of the Buddhist master who asked the question of his student, what is the sound of one hand clapping? That is a koan, right? And the koan is a kind of question that is meant to cause reason to question itself. The idea is to take the question seriously and try to make rational sense of it to give a rational answer. But if the koan is constructed correctly, it can't do that. It will actually force reason to question itself and thereby tear open the veil that hides reality from us by separating us from it through our concepts, through our maps, to tear up the map and look at the terrain itself. I have had experience of that kind of method. When I was in basic training, I had a drill sergeant, and the drill sergeant was actually a Zen Buddhist master. And my friend Khalil and I, he was from Lebanon, and he was my bunkmate, and he had come to the United States, and he and I were both in the same platoon. And he and I were also both very much interested in Buddhism. And when we found out that our drill sergeant was a Zen master, we of course went to him and said, "Can you teach us Zen?" Well, he said, "Yes, I'll teach you Zen, but in order for me to teach you Zen, you have to answer this question for me." And so now our barracks was in the shape of a quad. The buildings went like that, so these are the buildings. And in the quad was a tree, and right where we had our formations. So we had just finished the beginning of the beginning of the first week, and we had went to our drill sergeant and we said, teach you Zen. And he pointed to the tree there, and he says, I'll teach you Zen if you can answer the question, what is the meaning of that tree? And so we thought, okay, good. So we did some study, and we looked at the Noble Truths, and we said, well, the tree is like Indra's web. It's a relational entity that is built up from all the conditions around it, and therefore the tree is the microcosm of the macrocosm. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Well, we went to him, and the drill sergeant shook his head and said, nope, drop and give me 20. This happened throughout basic training. We would come up with an answer. We'd think, okay, this is a good answer. We'd go to our drill sergeant. He would just shake his head and go, drop and give me 20. And as time went on, it got more, 25 push-ups and so forth. So near the end of basic training, which was 2 months long, at the end of the final week, both Khalil and I were getting very upset. We were thinking, this guy doesn't know anything about Zen. He's just stringing us along to torture us. That's why he's doing this. We're not going to learn anything from this guy at all. So I just, being the kind of person who's very non-confrontational, I just said, all right, I'm just going to give up. I'm not going to do anything. But Khalil had determination. And he said, no, I'm going to try one more time. And he better not give me this drop and give me 50 thing, because if he does, I'm just going to lose it. And I said, don't lose it. He's the drill sergeant. Remember that. Well, the final, midway through the week, Khalil goes up to him, gives him another answer that he thought about very closely. And of course, the drill sergeant shakes his head and says, drop and give me 50. Khalil was angry. You should have seen him. He was shaking. He was so angry. And I thought to myself, drop, Khalil, drop. Don't lose it, because if you do, we're in a deep load of crap. But Khalil couldn't take it anymore. He's looking at the tree, and he points at the tree, and he says in very explicit language that I can't use on this, he said, that bleep, bleep tree doesn't mean a bleep, bleep thing. And the drill sergeant smiled. He said, now I can teach you Zen. See, the point was that the reasoning had to lead you to this crisis of reasoning so that you give up on reasoning, not intellectually. Oh, reason won't get me to reality. Yeah, you can say that, but not really believe it. But come to the experiential point where you stop looking through the glasses of reasoning and just let the tree be itself. The best summary of all this is in one of the Buddhist sutras called the Lotus Sutra. There, it talks about a disciple of the Buddha who said, before I was a Buddhist, I looked around me and I saw trees are trees and mountains are mountains. Then I started to study Buddhism, and I realized that, wow, trees are not trees, and mountains are not mountains. But then I became enlightened, and I realized trees are trees, and mountains are mountains.